Hello, welcome back to Asian Cinema Season 2 and the second guest spot of the season. There haven't been as many guests this time round, but I think where they lack in quantity this time round, they make up for it more than double in quality. So this will be Bryan Lomax from Bryan Lomax Movie Talk. Great guy, good friend of mine, awesome YouTuber. Go check out his channel and all his reviews if you haven't already. And he's going to pretty much set this up for you. He's going to be talking about the film When the Last Sword is Drawn. So enjoy his review, and thank you, Bryan, for taking part once again. He took part in the original Asian Cinema Season 2017. So without any further ado, on with Bryan.
Hello there, my name's Bryan Lomax, for those who don't know, but I would imagine you do by now because Luke has probably introduced me. I don't know, he might just throw this video up without introduction. So if he does, I'm Bryan Lomax. You might know me from Bryan Lomax Movie Talk. If not, you do now. Yes, thank you to Luke for inviting me on to talk about, well, whatever I wanted to talk about, really, as long as it was regards to Asian cinema. I did take part in his first Asian cinema season. I did my top 5 Zhang Yimou films, and yeah, he invited me back, so here I am. Now, I was going to do a first time watch of an Ozu film. So like my first time with Ozu. I was going to watch Tokyo Story. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I started watching it, in fact. I've got it on Blu-ray. I've had it for a little while now. Just not got around to watching it. Started watching it, and to be honest, I just wasn't in the right mood, the right mindset. So I kind of pushed that to one side. I will get to Tokyo Story at another time, I guess. But something I was in the mood for was this film, which is When the Last Sword is Drawn, directed by, let me get his name right here, because I'm terrible with Japanese names, Yujiro Takita. So Yujiro Takita directed this film. It did win the top prize at the Japanese Academy Awards, so their equivalent of the Academy Awards. Got Best Film, obviously, and Best Director. And it's been on my radar for years. I've actually had this DVD for 10 years, maybe. It was a friend who got it me as a gift. He asked me if there was any films out that I fancied watching, and I'd just seen The Twilight Samurai, which I think may have been released the same year. And I loved The Twilight Samurai. I thought it was a really great film. I should probably be talking about that, actually. But no, it's Twilight Samurai. Really great film, great samurai film. I like samurai movies. And this was I think it was released by the same company. Certainly on DVD, as it's from this same line, the Tartan DVD line. And yeah, so I figured it kind of looked like Twilight Samurai. It has that same kind of vibe. So I suggested that, and he got it for me. That was 10 years ago, and I've only just now got around to watching it. This is the crazy thing with collecting DVDs, is you have stuff on your shelves for years and years, a decade even, before you even get to it. But finally I got to it. After all that, is it any good? Well, yes. Thankfully, it is. It was a good film. I found it quite an immersive experience. Yeah, so it's a drama that plays out towards the end of the Edo period, which is basically, for anyone who's seen The Last Samurai, it's that era in Japan when the shogunate kind of went up against the emperor and lost, essentially. The samurai were pretty much wiped out with the help of Western guns being introduced into the royals' army. So yeah, it's kind of it looks at that, really, the extinguishing of the samurai in much the same way like Last Samurai, but obviously from a distinctly Japanese perspective. It follows this character whose name escapes me. I will look on this. Kaneshiro Yoshimura. He basically belongs to a particular clan of samurai, but not a very high-paying one, and he kind of jumps ship and goes to the big kind of the big leagues. And he comes off as a bit of a scoundrel, bit of a just after money, will do anything for money kind of thing. And then as we go through this film, and we see everything in flashback. So this other character who was like a samurai who's a bit disenfranchised with the way that samurai have gone. He kind of feels like there's no honor among them anymore, that they're becoming a bit of a joke. So when this guy arrives on the scene, it really irritates him. So he is chatting with this other guy who knew him, and over the course of the film, as they talk about this man, their recollections of him, this story starts to come out that evolves, that builds a picture of a man who is in fact the complete opposite of what our first impressions would have us gather, and that he was a very devoted family man who, yes, sought money but never spent any of it on himself. He literally worked wherever he could, however he could, in order to send money back to his family. And it's just, so it's a beautiful story about family, about honour, about serving one's country in the best way possible, which is through family. If everybody did the best for their family, you would have a really great kind of community atmosphere, I guess. It's just so it looks at all that kind of stuff through these characters, and it does a pretty good job of it. It's not a perfect film. It is 2 hours 20 minutes long, and I do think it could have been 2 hours. I think you could have shaved 20 minutes off. There are a few scenes that go on much longer than they need to be. One particular scene towards the end of the film, or in the last act of the film, when it appears that we're in the last moments of a particular character, it kind of stretches on a bit, and I'm kind of looking at my watch and almost saying, just die already. And I think it's it kind of has something of a soap opera vibe about it when we get those moments, when we get those moments that kind of linger a bit too longer than they should. Everything is very overly dramatic, shall we say, at times. Some of the dialogue, and that could be the translation. Whenever you have subtitles and you read what they've translated into English, what was originally Japanese, I'm never too sure if the translation is particularly spot on. But yeah, there are times when the dialogue does seem somewhat melodramatic. I've no problem with a bit of melodrama, to be honest. I think it's often used as a negative. There's a negative connotation that I think is prescribed to melodrama at times, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think in this case, there are times when it overpowers a lot of the other more subtle stuff, more subtle elements of the film, which play really well. The performances are pretty good, except, as I say, when it does step a bit too far into melodrama. I also love the period detail. I have been to Japan. I've been to Kyoto and places like that, where this film is set for most of the time. And I've seen a lot of these old, samurai dojos and whatnot, and so they have all those locations still in place, so they're able to make films like this, which are pretty authentic. I don't know how much of these sets are real life locations or how much were built for the sake of the film, but either way, it all looks pretty nice. The cinematography is quite beautiful. There's a particular scene, a very snowy scene that kind of felt very reminiscent of Kill Bill. It reminded me of what Tarantino did with Kill Bill. It's as I say, it's a well-made film. Now, Takita, the director, he comes from, I guess over here we would consider it quite a dubious past with regards to filmmaking, whereas in Japan, not so much. So he comes from a tradition of pinku films, or pink films as we would call them, which basically in Japan is softcore porn films, but made with a more artistic merit, shall we say. So they take the acting a bit more seriously, they take the cinematography and the filmic elements a bit more seriously, and try to apply a bit of artistic integrity to what is essentially just still porn at the end of the day. This guy has got a large chunk of these pink films under his belt. If you look at his CV, there's a lot on there. But it's where he honed his craft, you know, it's where he developed his art, so to speak. And, you know, for better or worse, it produced a filmmaker who seems to know what he's doing with the camera, who seems to know how to get or elicit the best emotional response, or the desired emotional response from you at the time when it's needed. So fair play to him, I guess. Yeah, it's I can't imagine the American Academy Awards or the BAFTAs kind of being so quick to award someone best director and best film and all that when they come from a history of making pornos. I like I say, different attitudes in Japan, I guess. That's not a judgment. It's just, like I say, it surprises me. There's a lot of action sequences in this as well, a lot of sword fights, sword play and stuff. I will say some of it doesn't land for me. A lot of it feels very stagey. A lot of it feels like boys playing with wooden swords, I guess. You know, somebody gets hit with a sword and I think we're supposed to believe that it's gone into them and it's kind of stuck in them, but it feels like, it feels like when a boy hits another boy with a wooden sword and then they pretend to go, ah, and then you can't actually show them pulling the sword out because then it's not the best action at times. There are other scenes or the other fight scenes and whatnot that are done pretty well. Our two main characters, there's a moment when those two have a crack at each other and it plays pretty well as an action scene. But then there are other parts, usually when you've got a lot of stuff going on at once, a lot of people fighting each other in the background and stuff, where perhaps the choreography could have done with a little more work, and perhaps they could have got a bit more bloody, I guess, a bit more violent. You know, I'm not someone who thinks that you have to have over-the-top violence, but when you're seeing people attack each other with swords, it kind of feels like a necessity in a way to show that damage. I look at something that Takashi Miike might do. You think about 13 Assassins, Blade of the Immortal, two films he made, and he goes full on with the violence in that. And like I say, I don't feel like I need blood and gore, but if you're showing people hacking each other up with swords, having a sword fight, doing that kind of damage, then if you don't want it to appear like just boys in a schoolyard play fighting, then you do kind of need to show that stuff. All in all, When the Last Sword is Drawn is a pretty decent film. I do think The Twilight Samurai is the better of the two. As I say, I watched that quite a long time ago, and I did like that film a bit more than this one. But I do like this, and I probably will watch it again at some point. As I say, a few negatives, bit too much melodrama. Could have used a bit more work in some of the fight scenes, and I do think that the running time was a little bit long. Some scenes lingered longer than they should, but other than that, really good performances, beautiful to look at, very good drama that is quite immersive and very engaging. So yeah, I think it's a really good film, and I would give it a 3.5 out of 5. I'm close to a 4. It is one of those films that is teetering on the edge of a 4, and who knows, maybe on a second watch it will go up. But for now, 3.5 out of 5 from me. But sorry if I've just gone on a bit there. I don't really know how long Luke wanted this to be, but there you go. It's been about 15 minutes, I think. So yeah, Luke, thank you once again for having me on. It's always a pleasure. Do check out this film if you haven't seen it. It is worth it. And definitely check out Twilight Samurai if you haven't seen that either. But until next time, thanks for watching.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans and calling into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you. 'Cause